Hey, how's it going, YouTube? Mike the Manic Geek here, and we finally have a bit of RGB spice on the channel now. Today we're going to be taking a look at the Rosewill Rk-9000V2 Rgb. Horrible name, awesome product. At least on paper, it seems to be. We have genuine Cherry MX mechanical switches, we have Perky RGB lighting, we have no drivers required to do anything, we have a braided detachable cable, and we have a really competitive price. But does it all actually amount to a genuinely good product? So let's hand things over to Mike the First Person Geek and get a little bit closer with this keyboard and see what's actually going on under the hood. I really wish the name for this product was shorter, I'm not gonna lie. Okay, so the first thing we're going to talk about here is build quality and overall aesthetics for the keyboard. Not really much to touch on, actually. It's a fairly clean and basic layout. This thing feels like it's built extremely durably. I have no qualms about this lasting what would likely be an extremely long time. A little bit of a missed opportunity right here, I think. The Rosewill logo is basically just a vinyl on the plastic. And it really would have been nice if this would have been RGB along with the rest of the keyboard, at least the Rosewill text itself. Again, just little nitpick, missed opportunity, still doesn't look bad. The only thing visually that's a little jarring initially with this keyboard is the caps lock indicator, which must always be blue, and your lock state lights, which must also always be blue. At the very least, it's blue, it's not red or something that's going to seriously clash with most color schemes. But again, slight nitpick, just something I want to make sure you guys were aware of. Now in the box, you do also get a keycap puller with this keyboard. Really nice to see, even though, yeah, it's a pretty basic keycap puller, but, you know, you can't always assume that someone is going to have access to a tool like this to maintain their keyboard. So I really like seeing these included, even if it's just a simple one, and even if the end user winds up with like 1,000,000 of these just from all the keyboards having them. I'd rather them have it than not. Now this keyboard is using genuine Cherry MX mechanical RGB switches. You can get them in blue or in brown. My particular model does have the clicky blue switches, and they do feel extremely nice on this keyboard throughout. You can also see here that the lighting effects are nice and smooth and even across all the keys on this keyboard. It's a really nice lighting implementation here, and yeah, that part of it I'm a huge fan of. The cable for this keyboard can be removed, and it is a right-angle mini USB cable, unfortunately. Not really a huge fan of where and how it plugs into the keyboard, but the fact that it doesn't route underneath the body of the keyboard does give you a bit more flexibility with how you want to route the cable. The braiding here is going to be a love it or hate it affair, but I suspect that more people than not likely won't have much of an issue with it. Now, as far as all the functionality on this keyboard is concerned, everything is done through the keyboard itself with a combination of the function key. I like what they did there. But with a combination of the function key and another key on the keyboard, you'll gain access to all of the functionality that's offered here, which does include things like 8 pre-programmable LED modes, both for RGB mode and for custom color mode. And these lighting modes do include fully on, RGB breathing, wave, raindrops, trigger, flashing, bump, and then of course LED off. And as mentioned earlier, you do get access to each of these modes for the color selectable modes as well as the RGB modes like what you see here. You can also save 5 different profiles on this keyboard with up to a maximum of 50 macros, which are independently programmable per key on the keyboard. However, there are certain restrictions based on the different function commands that have to exist on this keyboard, and the manual does cover those for you to help you set up macros. It's also really nice that the instruction booklet actually gives you an example macro and walks you through step by step how to set up the macro so that you get a little bit of experience with all the different functionality that this keyboard has to offer. That's a really nice touch, and it's something that I want to see more of in instruction booklets for products like these. You do, of course, also get your obligatory media function keys that let you play, pause, go back, fast forward, volume increase, etc., etc. And of course, we also have N-key rollover on this keyboard. Now, this is plug and play. Now, as mentioned just a little bit ago, all of the functionality for this keyboard is built into the keyboard itself, so there's no software that you have to access to control any of the functions here, as I'll demonstrate shortly. I really like the implementation of having no software required to run this keyboard because it gives you a lot more flexibility with the kinds of systems that you can use this with. But now we're going to spend a little bit of time on the feature that most of you are probably the most interested in, is the lighting for the keyboard. So I'm going to walk us through a couple of different lighting modes and a couple of the different adjustments that you can make with regard to the lighting on this keyboard. Now, the lighting mode that you see in front of you right now is the one that comes standard with the keyboard. Once you plug it into your computer, this should be the first thing you see. Oddly enough, this particular mode is accessible through the single color mode selection. I'm not entirely sure how it wound up in that particular area of functionality, but it's there and it's still nice to have. Now, a similar version of this can be accessed via function up, which brings you to a sort of similar version of it that scrolls from top to bottom towards the spacebar here. Now, if the speed of a particular mode is a little jarring to you, or if it's a bit much, then you can also change the speed. And now you can see it's just moving extremely slowly. Or you can change the speed the other way. Now suddenly it's cycling noticeably faster than it was before. You get up to 4 different levels of speed variation here, so you do get a little bit of fine-tuning that you can do with the specific effect that you're looking to use for the keyboard. Now, the next function in RGB light mode is going to be the Raindrop Effect. Raindrops is basically, you know, it looks like it's sprinkling, and the raindrops are hitting the ground, and the keyboard is the ground. You can speed it up really fast. Oh no, now it's a downpour! So trigger mode's kind of cool, right? This is the one where you hit the keys and they light up after you hit them and they stay lit for a little while and then go back to, you know, doing whatever. But the neat thing about it in RGB mode is that every time you hit the key, it's gonna light up a slightly different color than it did previously. Flashing mode is kind of oddly named. I mean, I guess that's a flash if you wanna call that a flash. But it basically sends a line of light across the line of keys on the keyboard based on the key that you just hit. So if you hit D, it's going to go all the way across this row of keys. If you hit N, it goes all across this row, and so on. Bump is kind of like the same version of that, only the line's rotated 90 degrees as it travels out. And then, of course, you can just choose to have the RGB lighting off altogether if you are a fuddy-duddy and not made of fun in the slightest. Then you technically have access to 100% backlit mode in the RGB spectrum, but it doesn't actually do anything, and it just sort of becomes a random color each time. Not really entirely sure why that option is selectable for RGB mode, but it's a thing. And then, of course, we get back to the tried and true light cycling mode, where it basically just cycles through single lighting mode for all of the keys at once. And yeah, so there's that. Now, currently I have the keyboard set to single color mode with just single lighting on, because I want to demonstrate how color adjustment works with this particular keyboard. So what you would have to do is hold the function key and then utilize F1 through 3, which are going to adjust the different levels of saturation for red, green, and blue lighting on the keyboard. And it basically does this by just adding a little bit more intensity, a little bit more intensity, a little bit more intensity, until you reach maximum intensity, and then, of course, you can also shut it off entirely. So in all actuality, because of this specific kind of adjustment that you have to make, you're not really getting the full RGB spectrum per se, but you're getting a diverse enough palette of colors that you will be able to notice the difference between one color and the next, and you're not really going to be missing out on a whole lot there. So let's demonstrate trying to make a color here. So I do function, and let's do 2 dashes of red, 3 dashes of green, and a dash, 2 dashes of blue. Now what we have here is this sort of turquoise looking color, but it's not particularly bright, is it? So we can change that by one at a time holding the function key, red, green, blue, red, green, blue, red, green, blue. Now we've increased the intensity of the whole color effect while staying within that 9 color range here, or the 9 setting range here, and we've increased the intensity of the color, and we've still maintained the same color that we selected before. Now I have the Rk-9000V2 Rgb set to white because I wanted to compare the white lighting on this keyboard to the white lighting on my daily driver keyboard, which does use dedicated white LEDs only for the key switches. Realistically, there's actually a minimal difference between the lighting on my Magic Force keyboard and my Rosewill keyboard here. The Rosewill lighting airs more on the pink side of things, but the only way you really notice it is if you're really focusing and trying really, really hard to see that color shift. Otherwise, it's actually surprisingly clean white light for a keyboard that is RGB. So they did a really good job of balancing color saturation on this one. Now I wanted to touch on the Perky lighting mode that you can utilize with this keyboard. Now the instruction manual for this keyboard does an extremely good job of explaining how to set up the Perky backlighting mode. So I'll not spend a whole lot of time going over how to do it, but moreover show how, what the end results can look like and one of the issues with this particular mode. So if I go ahead and hit function F7, this brings up the Perky mode that I set up just as a personal test for this keyboard, and I'm really a huge fan of how the Perky colors came out here, except for this guy. This guy right here is the function key. And the reason the function key is still doing this is because if you noticed before we switched over to this mode, we were using this RGB light cycling setting. Now when I switch back over to the Perky lighting mode, it unfortunately doesn't change this key, and the reason for that is because of how Rosewill had to set up the functions for this keyboard, and unfortunately the function key acts as the color identifier when you're doing your Perky lighting here. Otherwise you have no way of knowing exactly what color you're setting a key to. It's an unfortunate side effect of the way you have to use this keyboard, and normally that would be a sort of, I'm not gonna, that bothers me. But what you can do is actually, since this mirrors whatever setting it was on previously, you can just use the individual color adjustment setting and set a lighting setup so that when you do switch over to your Perky mode, the key is still going to match with everything. Yes, it's an awkward workaround, but it is something that works, so ultimately that's not really a huge deal. But guys, that's going to do it for the demo of the keyboard. Let's quickly wrap things up and discuss my final thoughts on the matter. So it's conclusion time, and I'm actually walking away from this largely impressed with the Rk-9000V2 Rgb. You've got a really strong set of features here. You've got macro programmability, N-key rollover, Perky backlighting with genuine Cherry MX mechanical switches, amazing build quality. Anything that there would be to complain about with this keyboard is really quite minor. Yes, it has a very understated look to it, but it's not trying to be overly blingy. It's just as blingy as it needs to be. Even when we come down to the backlighting issue with the function key being a little funky, even that's not really a huge deal because there's an easy workaround for it. So at the end of it all, again, given price, features, build quality, you've got a solid product here with the Rk-9000V2 Rgb. I just really wish they would name it something not that. But anyway, guys, that's gonna wrap it up for this one. Do the thumbs up, thumbs down, share, and subscribe thing like you guys do, how you do. Hit me up in the comments down below. Do any of you out there own this keyboard? What have your experiences been with it? Also, what kind of mechanical switches do you prefer? And are there any keyboards that you'd like me to try and take a look at for the channel? I'd love to hear your feedback. But until next time, take it easy, YouTube.